Have you ever tried colored whiskey? I'm not talking about green or blue or crazy colors like you might find in vodka. I'm talking about a single malt whiskey or whiskeys from around the world which might have had just a little bit of color added to it. Well, it's more common than you think, and let's talk about it. Now I want to break this down into three parts. Part number one is going to be kind of where in the world can you add coloring to whiskey, where is it most common, and where can't you do it. We'll also talk about why the industry does add coloring to their whiskey, why it's allowed, and finally my thoughts on the topic as well. I'm also going to throw in an interesting fun fact at the end about one country which does it a whole lot different than everybody else. But let's dive into it. Now, very simply put, we know there's a lot of different whiskey out there. There's a lot of whiskey categories, and each category has its own rules, and it goes on. But we're going to break it into countries and digest it up as well as we can. So first, let's talk about the USA. I wonder why. Now, it's actually interesting. If you're making bourbon, you are not allowed to add any food coloring to it. I mean, why would you? It's a new oak barrel. There's a lot of color already in there, so no need to really add. But this only really stands true for bourbons, no other type of whiskey in the US. So if you're making a corn whiskey or a rye whiskey or whiskey in general, single malt, you can theoretically add coloring to it. And if you take a bourbon and add coloring and maybe some flavors even, well, now it's a liqueur, or if there's no flavoring, whiskey. So that's the US. Bourbon, no food coloring, anything else, it's kind of fair game. Now, Scotland, I mean, that's real whiskey, right? Yeah, but they can also add coloring to it. And it's not only the Scots that do it, but the Irish do as well. Japan and Canada, all of them. You're allowed to add, or let's say all of the major whiskey producing countries, you're allowed to add coloring to it. So there's kind of reasons for and reasons against it. What the industry says, and it kind of makes sense to me, is that if you're creating a batch whiskey and you want your whiskey to taste the same or look the same to a consumer who might be seeing 2 bottles of whiskey on a shelf and hey, this one's darker than this one, but they're supposed to be the same whiskey, well, I mean, now I have questions. Is one bad? Is one good? Do I take the darker one? Do I take the lighter one? Or do I take the other whiskey next to it? Because, well, then I'm safer and maybe there's something wrong with those two, so I don't even take the risk. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. But then why are there so many whiskeys being produced in like dark bottles where you can't even see the color? I mean, this is becoming more and more common. This is an American whiskey, but you'll also get this in a Scotch and in Irish. Whiskeys all around the world are kind of stepping away from just clear see-through whiskeys. So why would you add coloring to a bottle of whiskey which is going to be in a dark bottle anyway? Consumers are never going to see it. And in many parts of the world, I mean, they come in a box or a carton and you're not going to see the color until you pour it. And that, I think, is misleading, because if the coloring or the reason that you're adding coloring is to stop people from being confused and making the wrong buying decision because your batches or blends from batch to batch change, fair enough. Okay, but a consumer won't really see that unless they're opening up the boxes and holding them next to each other, which I have never seen before or done before. So I don't know. I do think that many distilleries are trying to trick or fool consumers into thinking that they have a more premium spirit with the color, and this is why they're probably doing it. In reality, and we just made a video about this, it's probably just the barrel, and it's the age of the barrel. It's how many times the barrel's been used, what type of barrel it is. These things play more of a factor in color and have no representation of the actual quality of a whiskey. It could be bad and it could be red, dark red, beautiful color. But there's no guarantee that more color is going to mean more flavor or better flavor. So be careful. Now, on the other side of it, you do have some distilleries which are going out of their way to write on the bottle, not colored. And I think this has become slowly more and more from, I don't want to say marketing trick, but it's a way for honest distillers to be able to get in front of it and say, hey, we are not adding any coloring to our whiskey. This is the actual pure product, no additives, just water, nothing else. And I do like that. In fact, the whiskey that I make myself, I would never even consider, even if it's a batch product, which I haven't made yet, but I would be very, very surprised if I ever even came to the idea of adding coloring myself. Now, as I've promised, a fun fact. There's only one country that I know of in the world that actually requires all bottles of whiskey to have written on the label if there is any added coloring or not. And it's pretty common around the world. If someone's coloring their whiskey, they're actually using caramel coloring 150A. I mean, that doesn't even sound good, but that's what they're using. And in Germany, you're actually going to see it on the bottles. So if you ever get the chance, or you're visiting Germany, or you live in Germany, go check out a bottle of whiskey. This is from Austria, it doesn't have the rule, but they would actually have to say it with the addition of watercoloring, or if anything has been added to it. It's not actually for whiskey consumers, it's actually just for food and beverage companies in general. So spirits or whiskey have just fallen into the same category of food and beverage, rightfully. It's food, liquid bread, right? And definitely a beverage, one of the best. But yeah, I mean, so this is why. I mean, this is, it's not to protect you as a whiskey consumer, but it's to protect consumers in general. And it just helps us whiskey fans get a little bit more geeky about our whiskey. So next time you see a whiskey and someone tries to sell you on it because of the coloring or the shade of it, I mean, give it a try. I'd taste everything, but don't just take it at face value. No, whiskey can be colored many times. There is coloring added to it. So just be aware and make a decision based on what fits you best and what you enjoy in that whiskey. Not just because it's a dark red color. Hey, with that, cheers to you and your next glass of whiskey. Again, regardless of what it looks like. Maybe it's moonshine and it's like see-through whites. Try it anyway. Cheers all. Take care until that next glass.